Hello and welcome to this video on keeping your bonsai tools sharp. Like kitchen knives and workshop tools, your bonsai tools are best kept sharp. This keeps them safe and easier to work with. It also means they do what they need to do much better. Not all bonsai tools will need to be sharpened. You will generally find there are two categories: those with a straight blade and those with a curved blade. Straight blades include shears, scissors, and pruners. Then there are those with a curved blade. These are your concave cutters and knob cutters. Because these two different geometries, you need to take two different approaches. First, let's look at those with a straight blade. Your bonsai shears and scissors. The upside to having such a simple and pragmatic geometry is that they can all use a very similar degree of care and approach to achieve the desired result. That is, you can fundamentally do exactly the same thing with all of these to keep them sharp. It's worth noting that of the two sharpening options available, oil or water stones, we use water stones. You may choose to use something like an oil stone, which is fundamentally a very similar process, although you should familiarize yourself with the use of that particular approach first. Start by making sure the flat of the blade is just that, flat. Make sure you are sharpening the side of the blade that does not cross over with the other blade. This is important. If you sharpen the wider side, you may actually force the two blades further apart, creating a gap. This will prevent you from cutting things, as there will be a gap between the blades and they'll never be able to meet. Once you've begun sharpening the back of it and you have a nice flat side, you then move on to slowly drawing the blade back across the stone. This is moved in a direction as though you were trying to cut thin slices off the top of the stone. This does several things. First, to start with, you've already created a flat surface. Now you've gone along and created a burr along the edge of the knife. This will ensure that it remains sharp for longer, but also keeps your stone in good condition. The burrs may not be visible, but you'll certainly be able to feel them. There'll be an almost grist-like or sand-like feeling on the edge of the blade. The finer the stone you're using to sharpen with, the finer these burrs will be. Once you've done this, and you've created not just a smooth surface, but turn the blade over, now you can begin looking at what you've done. You should be able to see a clear difference, and hopefully you're using a stone with multiple sides. This is because you're now also going to flip your stone over, or swap it out for a new stone with a finer grit. You repeat the process of first working on the back of the blade to get it flat, and then working on the edge of the blade itself, slowly dragging it forwards, so that you are gradually working that edge off. You repeat this until you achieve a satisfactory sharpness. Remember to always sharpen on the outside of the blade. If you work on the inside, as said, you can generate that gap between them. This would be more like trying to cut with two different sets of scissors, but each only having one blade. While that's true, make sure you do at least spend a little bit of time going over the inside of the blades once or twice. This will ensure that if the steel has moved or warped as you are working it, you will gently remove that excess. That will allow those two surfaces to move against each other and not become locked up. If you have in the past used the opposite approach and instead worked on the inside of the blade rather than the outside, your scissors may be loose and not line up. This can be corrected in some limited cases. Better quality scissors for bonsai tend to have a post between them. This post is a solid piece of metal running between the two working halves. You can, in some cases, place this on a solid, flat surface. Tap it with a hammer, and gradually tighten the connection between the blades, bringing them together. This means that if you have made a mistake, such as sharpening on the wrong side of the blade, that you can fix that for a time. As you work the post, you need to tap it with more and more force. Simply continuing to hit it will work after a very long period, but slowly increasing the way and then force with which you tap on it will bring it together eventually and much quicker. You can also keep an eye on it by opening and closing the scissors to test whether or not they're where you want them to be. Round cutters, or those with a round geometry, such as knob cutters and concave cutters, are a different matter, and you're actually going to have to go to a little more effort to bring these up to scratch. The first thing to do is to use sandpaper, but not just generic sandpaper like you might find at your local hardware store. Rather, you want to get the black sandpaper used for automotive repairs. This is much finer, but also importantly, it's often a wet and dry sandpaper, meaning you can wash it off and clean it out. Something important when we're talking about metal products that'll otherwise fill up and clog the sandpaper. Place this over a hard surface. You want a hard surface, as what you're going to be doing is controlling most of the work with your hand. Having a hard, level surface is going to make this much easier. Unlike a razor blade, in which you would use a strop, and that the movement of the razor over the strop isn't a concern, you need to think about this more like a kitchen knife, where you do not want the edge of the blade to be rounded over or become warped by being worked. This is why you go with a hard surface. Use some spray-on adhesive and mount your sandpaper, preferably several grits of increasing fineness. Once this is done, get your tool and check to see what angle it's sitting at. What you want to make sure of is that the faces of the cutting edges are going to be kept at the same angle or as close as you can manage. The inner surface should be flat. The outer surface should be curved. We begin with the outer surface. First, because this is much easier to correct any mistakes you make. Second, any mistakes you do make are unlikely to have a significant impact on the ability of your tool to do its job. The first thing you do is put a little bit of texture along that edge. That texture is something you're going to be working off, and you know where you've either applied too much pressure or not enough pressure. Hold the blade as flat to the surface as you can. Gradually move it forwards and backwards. This will give you a consistent edge. Make sure you consciously work on keeping an even pressure along the entirety of that motion backwards and forwards. If you don't do that, you'll find that you create a bit of an angle. The blade becomes lopsided. As you roll the blade over, you'll find that the movement should naturally follow a sort of semi-circle arc. If this isn't happening, you'll need to try and do it yourself. Now that your blade's on the outside of it lining up and all neatly sharpened to a point, you now need to look at working on the inside. As said, the inside is both more important but also thankfully much easier to work on. It is a flat, straight edge in most cases. Some of the fancier and more customized tools have been made with people who sharpen theirs in a different manner, and that's well outside the scope of this video, and you're best taking them to a specialist. The first step is to place the flat of the blade hard against the surface. You want to move this forwards and backwards in a gentle motion but with pressure applied. Make sure that at all times you have it hard against the surface. Not so hard that you're digging into your sharpening stone, but hard enough that you have even, flat pressure. You want to try and keep, at least if your tool's in original condition, the exact same angle as you originally had. Some people will attempt to either make the angle more sharp or less sharp, depending on what they think is best. And unless you're more familiar with your tools and know what you want, this is not an advisable decision. Keep going until you see or feel that burr that we mentioned originally. Once this is done, change to the other side of your cutters. Repeat until a burr develops there as well. Then go back to the outside of the cutter and clean it off. This should finish up with a nice, sharp, concave or knob cutter. Depending on how fine a stone you are using, you may want to change between sharpening the inside edges, then going to the outside and alternating between these on different strokes. This is the simple summary of how to keep your two primary tool types sharpened, those with a straight linear edge and those with a round, more circular edge. There are other tools that at some point we'll try and describe how to care for them as well, but for this stage, these are the ones that are going to get the most wear and tear. They're also the ones that you're going to be relying on most frequently. Because of this, knowing how to keep them in their best working condition will save you both discomfort in their use, but also mean that they work much better for you. Thank you for watching this video. If you have found it interesting, consider liking, sharing, and subscribing. Please post any comments, questions, or suggestions you might have below.